Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman. Thank you for the listeners that have just joined us. I've noticed a huge jump in people listening to the podcast. I'm grateful that you're here, but I'm also sorry that you're here. I wanted to introduce you. My name's Christy. In 2011, my oldest son died of cancer. It was unexpected, to say the least, because there was 6 weeks between diagnosis and death. And it was actually the chemotherapy that killed him. They gave him too much chemotherapy, and it overwhelmed his immune system and killed him. So it was an unexpected death. And you would think, well, he had cancer. Didn't you anticipate that outcome? No, I didn't. I didn't have enough time to adjust to that. So for years, I struggled with my own grief. And I really needed to talk about it with people. And at that time, people weren't out there with their grief on Instagram. There were secret Facebook groups that I would participate in, but I was always kind of shy. Also, I'm a counselor by trade. I didn't want to go to groups in my local area because I didn't want people to know. I don't know, I experienced this feeling of shame. And I think the shame comes from why you're taking it so hard, because you're a counselor, you should know. And the reality is, I've accepted after 11 years that none of us really know. It's also coming up on Thanksgiving time here in South Dakota. The weather's been really nice, so you don't really anticipate that it would be Thanksgiving. And so that's kind of given me a reprieve from all the emotions that I have. And then something else happened last week. Well, it's actually been a 2-week process. So 2 weeks ago, I had a dream. And I had a dream about someone I knew from high school. We had kind of lost touch over the years. So I'm not going to say that we were friends, but we're like Facebook friends. She had breast cancer, and then she had pancreatic cancer. And at the time I had this dream, she was still alive. And in my dream, I'm helping her move. I'm in her house. And there's something significant about these vases, but I was wrapping up these vases, and she kept telling me, and I wish I'd written it down when I woke up, but I did not, something about red. And I remember when I woke up, I was like, is there something about red with me? Like, did we have a saying about red? I don't know, and I don't understand. And I didn't think much about it because I'm a dreamer. I have vivid dreams. It's whatever. I dream about various people at various times. A week later, she died. And that has forced me to look at my own mortality a little bit closer. And also forced me to take a look at Christopher, because he also died of cancer. And she wasn't on Facebook very often, but you could see where she was wasting away. It's like, was I sheltered from seeing that and having that happen with Christopher because he died so suddenly? Like, and I've wondered this over the years, is it easier to die in the beginning when you still have a healthy body, or at the end after you fought so hard and you're tired? I really don't know. But I do know I started looking at my own mortality and be like, if I was in her shoes, we're the same age. Am I going to be happy to go on and meet Christopher on the other side? And then I ask myself, that's what I would like to believe, right? I would like to believe that he'll be the one that comes and gets me and takes me to wherever we go. Depending on your belief system depends on where you go, so I don't like to put out there what my own belief system is in these certain scenarios. So that has been a little bit difficult. And then watching her significant other mourn on Facebook. And I just feel so bad for him, like so bad. the endless pictures. He hasn't really written anything. And it just hurts so much. I just wish there wasn't death in society. And I don't know about the rest of you, but the war that's going on overseas, seeing all those dead children and those people crying, and God is just tearing my heart out as a grieving mom to know that someone is suffering like that and suffering in such great depths. So that's been on my mind this week. And this morning, while I was waiting for my husband to come home, I decided to revisit Buffy the Vampire Slayer. For those of you that don't know, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like she was early 90s, 2000s, and I all about fantasy, sci-fi. I don't think she's particularly horror, but there was a lot of life lessons that came out of Buffy. And I love the Buffy musical. And I watched it again today because at Thanksgiving time, there's always a longing for Christopher to be here, to participate in Thanksgiving. So briefly, the plot. And if you want to look up the episode, it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, once more with feeling. I think it's episodes or season 6 or 7. Anyway, so Buffy had died. Her friends were not willing to let her go. So they performed a spell to bring her back to life. Well, Buffy came back and she's not appreciative because she has to come back to Earth and be a human again and experiencing all the pain of being a human. Because when you go to heaven, and she specifically says she went to heaven and she was pulled out of heaven, there was no pain, there was no suffering, that she was happy there. And because her friends couldn't let her go, she was pulled back down to Earth. And now she's experiencing pain, she's experiencing suffering, she's experiencing all these feelings that she doesn't want to experience. And so she starts singing about it. And the singing comes about because everyone was keeping secrets and no one was expressing how they really felt. So they started singing. So now everybody knows that they pulled her out of heaven. Now, I was a huge Buffy fan long before Christopher died. My kids make so much fun of me because I don't even remember what nights. I think she said Tuesday nights. Oh, Dawn needs rescued. It must be Tuesday night. I'd have to rush home and watch my Buffy. But on this Thanksgiving holiday, when we're grieving for our loved ones, I reflect on the lesson that came out of that show on Buffy, which is the importance of letting go. The importance of realizing that if our loved ones, for whatever reason, had stayed on this earth, they might have experienced, especially in Christopher's case, getting sicker and sicker and sicker, being in pain, suffering. I know there's a great debate, but you need to realize that all death is an escape from how you feel. And for whatever reason, the people that have passed on, they've escaped those negative feelings. And who am I to wish that Christopher would be back on Earth, because then he would be experiencing cancer. And he would have gone through the fight like I saw this person on Facebook go through. And I can't imagine. I've heard that having cancer is just so painful. And I wouldn't want that for Christopher. I wouldn't. It's hard to understand how that would apply if your loved one got murdered or in a car accident or all of those other horrible things that happen to people. But I think it's important for those of us left on earth is to understand that we have to let them go. So at Thanksgiving time, it's especially hard. I was triggered by that girl dying, triggered at work so much. I have a coworker that doesn't have any family around here, and I made arrangements to spend Thanksgiving with her. And I realized as I'm getting ready to do the podcast and I'm getting ready to organize what we're going to talk about today, I realized, why am I spending Thanksgiving with her? Because I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like to not have anyone. And that's where the compassion of having someone die comes in. Because I've experienced that lonely. She hasn't had anybody die, but it's heartbreaking to be alone on Thanksgiving. Just heartbreaking. So that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about too with Thanksgiving is, why is it so hard? Why is Thanksgiving so hard? It's simple. It's a reminder of all we lost. There's these big family get-togethers. You can't escape it. I can't explain this to the non-grievers of the world. People ask you, what are your holiday plans? What are you doing for Thanksgiving? Mourning is what I'm doing for Thanksgiving. Do you think they really want to hear that? I don't think so. But I think if there's any non-grievers that listen to this podcast, it's important for you to know that Thanksgiving is a reminder of all that we lost. Thanksgiving stands for family. Families coming together, families celebrating, eating good food, hanging out together, and even with the distance. Nowadays, with the iPhones where you can do FaceTime and you can do Zoom and all of these things, families are actually being able to come together even when they're distant. But even 20 years ago, we called each other on the phone at Thanksgiving time. There is no phone to heaven. So the whole day is about realizing what I have lost and mourning that. And I can be mourning that at the same time that I am experiencing joy with being with my family. And actually somebody left that comment on my Instagram. The question was, what do you wish people most knew about grieving? And it's that we experience our grief and our joy simultaneously. That's the first thing that you need to know. There's also, at least on my part, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but there is a sense of jealousy. I don't, for various reasons I've talked about on this podcast, I don't have a large family unit besides my husband and my 2 sons. We were military. There's other reasons besides being military that we didn't have family around on holidays, but primarily it was because my husband was military and people didn't want to travel. So it's just us. So the loss of one of us is a significant loss. And so when people talk about having family to go to, family to hang out with, but also understand, if you get invited to these large family gatherings, it's taboo to talk about your deceased loved ones. On this Thanksgiving Day, and hopefully I'm wrong, hopefully more people will have a positive experience or a negative experience, but try bringing up your deceased loved ones. The longer it's been since they died, the more, are we over that by now? Are we over that by now? My answer will always be, no, not over it. That's the other thing I want you to know, is that you have your family there. I don't have my family there. So the other thing about Thanksgiving is you could do a friend's Thanksgiving. But my other issue with Thanksgiving is that, at least for me, physically it's hard. It's hard to simultaneously be grieving, simultaneously cooking, taking care of everybody, participating in conversation, and hiding how I feel. I don't live in an environment where it is safe to say how I feel. I don't know how many other people have safe spaces. I can say maybe one thing, but I can't talk about these kind of things, how hard it is. I'm pretty certain that most of my family doesn't listen to my podcast, which is fine. I created this podcast to be able to talk about it. And I talk about it because I don't think anybody's talking about these things. I don't think they're talking about how hard Thanksgiving is. And I don't know why, and I think I'll put this as a poll on my podcast so is Thanksgiving harder for you or is Christmas harder for you? That's what I would like to know. For me, Thanksgiving is harder. I have absolutely no idea why. Maybe Christmas is easier because it's the end in my mind, except for Christmas to June is all of my anniversary dates, so those 6 months are brutal. They're still brutal. But Christmas is somewhat easier for me. For me, Thanksgiving is the hardest. And then there's always the anticipation. The anticipation of what am I going to be like on Thanksgiving Day? What if I cry on Thanksgiving Day? Then the anxiety starts. Now you can't be sad. You can't be sad, Christy. You can't be sad on Thanksgiving. Got to put on a smiley face. It really doesn't matter who I'm with. Like this person that I'm going to go to Christmas dinner with, she is not someone that I talk about missing my son with. In fact, we were talking about something else, and she's one of these ones that thinks you should get over it. So she's most definitely not going to be someone that I talk about missing Chris with. Absolutely not. In fact, only my bestie, well, I have two of them that I trust enough to talk about this stuff with, who will flat out ask me, do you have somewhere to go for Thanksgiving? Do you need somewhere to go? And a lot of times, also understand, I don't know if there's anybody else out there like this, but I will choose to be alone. A lot of the time, I will choose to be alone. And if you want to kind of understand where that comes from, listen to my episode. I believe I did it last year, right about this time. I'll try to put it in the description what the name of it was. And I described the first Thanksgiving after Christopher died, and it was brutal. It was brutal. And that kind of set the course for the rest of the Thanksgivings. And realistically, my dad just turned 80. Yeah, 80 years old. So this could be his last Thanksgiving too. And so there's a lot of pressure on this Thanksgiving Day. But I think the most important thing is just I miss Chris so much. So much. And I kind of entered into my mad phase of grieving, which is, it's hard to be thankful when you're mad. And that's what I was going to do the podcast on, was trying to be thankful when you're mad. But I am. I'm mad that I live in a world where death occurs. I'm mad that I live in a world that takes children before parents. I'm mad at Christopher because he drank and smoked a lot, which contributed to his own death. I'm mad that he didn't take my advice years ago and tell it. I told him we came from a family of alcoholics and that he should stay away from alcohol. My understanding, he was an alcoholic. If you can't stop drinking, you're an alcoholic. And that's what was told to me. He was trying to stop. Cancer treatment don't work if you're drinking. And the heavy-duty 3-pack a day smoker does not help. I'm mad that he didn't listen to that. I'm mad that he didn't call. So understand. So I'm mad about all of these things, and it's Thanksgiving, and I'm supposed to be grateful, and I'm not grateful. I'm not grateful at all. I'm mad. I don't know what there is to be grateful about. I try to be grateful that he didn't have any suffering. After watching this person that I know on Facebook, I'm grateful that he didn't have any suffering. I've had to acknowledge that I'm selfish. Because him staying here on earth would have meant he had to endure these horrible things. So I'm selfish. And I know I'm selfish because I want him here. But I also believe that he deserved a life. And I feel like he's robbed. So it's so hard. This is why I want you to understand that it's so hard with Thanksgiving to not be mad. So for the first time this year, I've acknowledged how mad I am about Christopher dying and how guilty I feel about not being grateful for Thanksgiving. But it's really hard. It's really hard to be grateful when someone is missing. And I think this is a unique battle to grieving people. I haven't lost a spouse. I haven't lost a parent. Well, I lost my mom, but I don't think it's quite the same. Is it easier if they lived a full life? That you can be grateful for the moments you had together? But what if it's a life that's been cut short? And I can't even imagine how mad I would be if somebody took their life. The agony of that just breaks my heart when I think about that. And the other thing is that there's such pressure to be thankful for Thanksgiving. I didn't see it so much this year, but last couple of years, the 30 days of Thanksgiving. So you have to be thankful for something every day. And then I see people doing the thankful journals. It's really hard for me to do things like that just because I miss Chris. And if there's any positives, I can't even imagine. So when people ask those things, I was just about to say, if there's any positives to Christopher dying, there's only one. Maybe his suffering wasn't as much. But I don't know what people expect you to say. I've had people tell me, focus on him living. He didn't live. He had 25 years on this earth. He didn't get most of the experiences that people have. He put in a lot of living into those 25 years, but there was so much more, and there was so much more promise. And that's what I mourn on Thanksgiving. So if there's a message that comes out of this episode of the podcast, the message is, you never know who around you is grieving and what they're grieving for. You never know what their family lives are like, or what kind of trauma they experienced in their family of origin. So please be careful when asking people, what are you thankful for today? Because there's a whole lot of suffering in the world right now. And maybe I don't want to tell you what I'm thankful for today, because that falls underneath the subject of Christopher. And do you really want to know that I'm thankful that Christopher didn't have to suffer? Or do you want to hear the pat answers? And I'm just not a pat answer person. So if there's anything that you learn about me from listening to my podcast, is that I'm real. That's how I am in real life. That's how I am. That's how I write. That's how I speak. I'm real. I say what other people are only thinking. It gets me into trouble. It's not necessarily a good trait to have. Because I might have a more popular podcast if I only focused on, I can't even imagine what the positives of losing a child would be, but the positive experiences, or if I only interviewed people that have all the answers to how you get over grief. Because that's all anybody's looking for, is answers to stop the suffering. But I don't have the answers, not for you. I don't have the answers for myself. But I know together, when we talk about it, we share the burden. And that's why I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving. I want to normalize that in grief, it is okay to be mad at Thanksgiving. It is okay, because this is just where I am right now. I'm sure there are many of you that are in the same spot that I am. And we feel this obligation to hide, because Thanksgiving is supposed to be about family, and it's supposed to be about eating together and joy, 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 joy. It's not supposed to be about mad. It's not supposed to be about sad. Well, I am all of those things. And I want you to know that it's okay if you are all of those things too. So as you prepare for Thanksgiving, you can reach out to me on Instagram, DM me, listen to my stories. I will try to help in any way I can. But also understand that this journey of grief is one of solitude. It's one of inner growth. It is one of developing your own strength. And if you follow someone else's path to do this, it will be someone else's path and not your path. And the important part is to figure out what your path is. That's why I encourage people to go deep into their grief, to examine it, to have some kind of artistic expression. Maybe Thanksgiving is the day to start. Start writing, start drawing, start thinking, do a biography. Say, what experiences in my life contributed to how I am today? Well, thank you for listening. I really love doing these podcasts. It's been so helpful. If you want to come on the podcast, please reach out to me on Instagram. That's primarily where I'm active at, and primarily on the weekends. Thanks for listening, and this is Christy signing off for the week. Have a great week.